Alexander, son of Polyperchon, assassinated in 314 BCE. Alexander first appears on the stage of history in 318 when his father Polyperchon, now general of Europe and the regent for Alexander IV, dispatched him to Greece to fight Cassander. Cassander had landed with the intention of appealing to the oligarchic regimes in Greece that his father, Antipater, had established. To combat this, Alexander went to the Peloponnese to help the democratic factions there overthrow the oligarchs and thereby prevent Cassander from establishing a reliable power base in Greece. By the time that Alexander reached Athens in 318 BCE, Cassander's admiral Nicanor, not Cassander's brother, had seized the Piraeus. Alexander, later joined by his father Polyperchon with the bulk of his army, tried to dislodge Nicanor, but to no effect. Since the siege was going to take some time and the district could not support such a large army, Alexander was left behind with a portion of the army to continue the siege, while his father marched to the Peloponnese. When Cassander arrived in person to reinforce Nicanor, Alexander withdrew and joined his father. In the meantime, Polyperchon's failure to capture Megalopolis with 20,000 men and a few war elephants harmed their cause and undermined their prestige. Alexander was left behind in the Peloponnese when his father went back to Macedon to align with Olympias and deal with Eurydice II's new alliance with Cassander. When Cassander mustered his forces to make his bid for Macedon in the north, Alexander had free rein in the Peloponnese, and he was able to capture a few cities. His handful of gains during this time ensured Polyperchon's immediate and long-term survival, as Cassander secured full control of Macedon in 317-16, and Polyperchon had to flee to Alexander empty-handed. When Cassander came back to further his control over Greece, Alexander blocked him at Corinth, but Cassander bypassed him by sea and managed to capture the vital city of Argos along with Hermione and most of the cities of Messenia. Polyperchon dispatched Alexander to negotiate an alliance with his former enemy Antigonus the One-Eyed. Alexander arrived while the siege of Tyre was going on, and he was probably present when Antigonus issued the famous proclamation of Tyre in 315 BCE, which essentially declared Cassander to be a usurper because he had murdered Olympias. Antigonus gave Alexander 500 talents for the war effort, and he had earlier dispatched his general Aristodemus of Miletus to aid Polyperchon's cause. In return, Polyperchon gave up his titles as regent and general of Europe, which were untenable given his extreme weakness. To judge by his later actions, Alexander might not have approved of that concession, and he may have held this concession against his father. When he returned to Europe, Alexander operated in conjunction with Aristodemus for a short time. However, quite unexpectedly, Alexander defected to Cassander when Prepolaus met with him secretly to offer him the position of general of the Peloponnese. Supposedly, this was all that he had ever wanted, if Diodorus Siculus is to be believed. However, as Robin Waterfield rightly observes, such a claim makes no sense considering that his father currently held that title, and he was already quite old. When he defected, Alexander took Corinth and Sicyon with him, which were probably the two most important cities under Polyperchon's sway. Whatever his motives may have been, Alexander is one of only two successor generals who had the temerity to betray his own father. Alexander's attempt to besiege Cyllene in 314 was stopped in its tracks by his former colleague Aristodemus. Next, he marched in the Achaean city of Dyme, where the democratically inclined citizens had Cassander's garrison besieged and on the verge of surrender. Breaking the siege and capturing the city, Alexander punished the leaders of the democratic faction and settled the city's affairs. Returning to Sicyon that same year, Alexander was murdered by a citizen of Sicyon named Alexion, and he was succeeded in power by his highly capable wife, Cratesipolis, who will be the subject of another video in this series. In the final analysis, Alexander seems to have been a better commander than his aging father, Polyperchon. His motives for betraying his own father are unknown, and given the ever-increasing likelihood of an eventual Antigonid triumph, it is unlikely that we will ever figure out what inspired him to do what he did by siding with Cassander, whose long-term prospects did not look good at that moment. It is not improbable to think that he might have been motivated by some sort of unknown personal animus against Polyperchon, thought that the old man was inept, or feared that an Antigonid supporter like Aristodemus would inherit his father's position upon his death. The careers of few men in this period show how fickle fealty could be when the stakes were so high and the potential rewards were so great.